Hi, this is Goich. Welcome to the Doorway to the Word. Well, today we're going to talk about the brief history of Christianity, episode 10, the Reformation, part 1. What is Reformation? Reformation of the church. That's what it is. Well, it's one of the biggest the movement, the change happened in Christian history. It's a turning point of Christian history. This is the beginning of the resurrection plan God set in motion for the church. Well, this is the background of Reformation in Europe. At that time, what happened was the rise of the Ottoman Empire, the Islamic Empire. It came in power in 13th century. This Ottoman Empire was a long-lived empire. It went on until the middle of 20th century. And with that, it brought the fall of the Byzantine Empire in 1453. Byzantine Empire was the former Eastern Roman Empire. Well, this led the European countries to enter into the age of discovery, to explore other parts of the world. The age of discovery introduced the new cultures and wealth from other parts of the world, the different ideas, different religions, different thoughts, and Europe gave birth to Renaissance. Well, meanwhile, those things are happening, those changes are happening in Europe. The Catholic Church, whose supremacy was gradually declining after the failure of the Crusade, still owned quite a bit of wealth and the land. And at the same time, they're having a big problem within the corruption. Big power, big wealth, always birth the corruption. And that contributed to the bankrupting of the church as a spiritual force. The people did not see their authority as superior anymore. Well, in this atmosphere, there are certain people emerged who oppose and condemn the corruption and hypocrisy of the Catholic Church. And they were called reformers, also known as Protestants, because they protested against the Roman Catholic Church. So this is a story of the reformers. Well, the famous reformer, you might come up with a name like Martin Luther and John Calvin, but before the Reformation, there are a couple of other Reformation actually triggered the Martin Luther and the others Reformations later on stage. I call this is a pre-Luther Reformation, and it happened in the 14th century. It started in Europe. One of them was started by a man called John Wycliffe in England. And I actually spoke about the Wycliffe in episode 8. So please go back and have a look in detail. But he was against the organized state-owned church that made him known as the father of Protestant Reformation. Well, another one, the pre-Luther Reformation, was known as a Bohemian Reformation. Well, this is a Christian Reformation movement against the Catholic Church. It started from Prague, known as Bohemian Reformation. The notable leading figure was a man called John Hus, the Czech theologian. The beginning of the Bohemian Reformation were closely related to the criticism of a lavish lifestyle of many Catholic priests. Catholic priests, they were rich and they had a life of luxury. And those Bohemian reformers, they protested against those luxurious lives because they believed the Christians should have a simple life. Well, through this Reformation gave birth to the famous Moravian Church in Herrenhut, the Eastern Germany, the oldest Protestant church there, and which later supported by the local count, man called Nicholas Zinzendorf. these Moravian churches, they are famous for the Moravian missionaries, which were the first large-scale Protestant missionaries movement which reached as far as Africa, America, Caribbean, and the Far East. So these are the pre-Luther reformations that kind of encouraged other reformations to come in later in Europe. Well, here comes 16th century, Martin Luther and others Protestant Reformation. And this is how it started. Well, at that time, there was an issue in Catholic Church. What was it? By the end of the 15th century, it having been neglected during the period of Avignon papacy, which is the period that the popes were taken to France. The old St. Peter's basilicas in Rome had fallen disrepair. They just became really in a bad state. It was falling apart because the Pope was taken to France. Well, a succession of popes actually tried to refurbish and rebuild and restore this St. Peter's Basilica, but the decline of the church authority through the political problems and corruption within, it had been really difficult. They could not raise money for it. So this basilica, the home of the Roman Catholic Church, was just kind of remained falling apart. So in 1517, the Pope Leo X came up with the idea. This Leo X is a bit of a man. Well, his actual name before became Leo X, his name was Giovanni. Giovanni from powerful Medici family in Italy. And he was elected the Pope in 1513. And he was the son of Lorenzo de' Medici. He was known as Lorenzo the Magnificent. He kind of this famous Medici family. They were the patron of the famous artists like Michelangelo's and Da Vinci and all those people, and they were rich. And this Lorenzo, this Giovanni's, the Leo X's father, he made the name Medici. Well, the Giovanni became the cardinal through father's power and political connections, and eventually elected as a Pope Leo X in 1513. So he became a Pope because father was a rich and powerful guy. So he wasn't that spiritually enthusiastic about being the Pope, but he was enthusiastic about being a Pope as richest and most powerful man in Europe. And he was actually known as squanderer and best known for his wasteful habit and his hedonistic quote. He quoted this, he said this: "Since God has given us the papacy, let us enjoy it." That was his attitude. He was from a rich family. Well, anyway, he came up to this scheme to raise the money to rebuild the St. Peter's Basilica. It's called indulgence. What is indulgence? It is basically a ticket to heaven sold by the church. So basically, those people who want to go to church said, "Come to me, come to the Papa, pay the money, buy this ticket, you're guaranteed to go to heaven," which is totally against what Jesus said. Well, but that's what he did to raise the money to rebuild St. Peter's Basilica. Of course, something like that kind of corruption happens. There are people who protest against it. In response to this corruption of the Catholic Church, a man called Martin Luther, a monk and theologian at the University of Wittenberg in Germany, then it was Holy Roman Empire, wrote his 95 Theses, which is the things against, basically protesting against Catholic Church, and nailed it on the door of the Church of Wittenberg, condemning what he saw as a purchase and sale of salvation, which was totally against God. You see, Martin Luther had revelation of salvation through grace at that point, and saw what the Catholic Church is doing. Then he said, this is not good. So that's what he did. So Luther also believed that the Word of God should be available not only to privileged people like church bishops or scholars and priests, but they should be available for everybody, ordinary people. So he translated the Bible in German from Latin. Well, when someone always, well, it happens, isn't it? When someone protests against some big power, there are always the opposition. If someone starts something new, there are always oppositions. So that's what the Luther had. The Luther's protest to the church and Pope Leo X, the Pope responded by issuing excommunication to Luther in 1521. So basically, Pope was saying, Luther, you're not the part of the Christian kingdom anymore because we don't like you. Well, that's the Pope's stance. There was another powerful opposition to Luther. This was Charles V, the Emperor of Holy Roman Empire. Well as the Emperor of Holy Roman Empire, he was also King of Spain. In Spain, he was known as Charles I at the same time. So he was a dual king. And Charles was from Habsburg dynasty. And he married Isabella of Portugal. That makes Charles as a marital grandson of Ferdinand II, the King of Spain, and his wife Isabel I, the Queen of Spain. Do you remember Ferdinand II and Isabel, the Queen of Spain? They were famous for initiating Spanish Inquisition. Nobody expected, but they did. And he was devout Catholic. Can you see? So Charles V was a grandson of this devout Catholic family. Here, Habsburg dynasty, very interesting because they continue to have a power throughout the history from Middle Age up until Second World War or First World War. This Habsburg dynasty, that originally the one of the many small aristocrat family in Germany. In Germany, there are many aristocrat families, the landlords and all those people. And what they did was they chose someone to kind of help them get together. And Habsburg family was one of those small ones. But it came in power as a sovereign dynasty, and the continuous continuous occupation of the throne of Holy Roman Empire. What happened was, nobody wanted to become head of those aristocrats in Germany because so many problems there. So they elected this small family, Habsburgs. Can you be the one? Yeah, I think you can do it. So they made him the head of the aristocrats kind of groups in Germany. And the Habsburgs, they were clever. They actually sent their sons and daughters to all other powerful kingdoms in Europe and made an alliance through the marriage. And they kind of established the power and became a sovereign dynasty. And from their family, the emperors of Holy Roman Empire came. Through the political marriage with European monarchs, they grew in power and they became most prominent European dynasty from 15th century to 20th centuries. Well, Charles V, it came from this kind of family. So he was in such a power as Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, and he opposed Martin Luther. Charles V and Leo X packed together to condemn Luther for opposing the Catholic Church. Charles V declared the Martin Luther an outlaw at the Diet of Worms in 1521. This Diet of Worms is a kind of formal imperial assembly of Holy Roman Empire. So whatever they decided there, it becomes legal in empire. So there, the decree which they condemned Luther as a notorious heretic and banned citizen of the empire from propagating his ideas. So Luther became outlaw from the Holy Roman Empire. Charles V also tried to arrest or even to assassinate Luther, but Luther was saved by a man called Prince Frederick III, the Elector of Saxony, also known as Frederick the Wise. He took a side of Luther and saved Luther from being killed by Charles V. The story is pretty interesting. Frederick faked a highway attack on Luther while he was way back to the Wittenberg, abducting and then hiding him in the Wittenberg castle from Pope and Charles V. So basically, he kidnapped Luther, and this scared Luther, thought, oh, I'm gonna get killed. But Frederick came and said, Mr. Martin Luther, I agree with you, I give you protection. In the public, Luther was kidnapped by a highway robber. But in fact, he was actually saved by this Prince Frederick III the Wise. Well, Luther came under Frederick's protection at the Wittenberg Castle, where he translated the New Testament from Greek to German. Well, this Reformation shook the Church and the European countries, especially the Holy Roman Empire. The many who had discontent with the Catholic Church and the Holy Roman Empire turned to Protestantism, and eventually even the military alliance of Lutheran princes, it's called Schmalkaldic League, arose to rebel against the empire. It actually became the military conflict. Well, in 1555, they feared for the division of the empire. The Charles V, the emperor, signed a treaty known as Augsburg Settlement or Peace of Augsburg, which recognized the Protestant as the official choice of Christian religion other than the Catholic of the Europe. Well, what was the effect of all this? Well, despite the objective of the Augsburg settlement, which was to prevent the conflict between two religious sides within the empire by fixing the boundaries between two faiths, Protestant and Catholic, it actually divided Holy Roman Empire into two sides, and the rest of the Europe too, the Catholic and Lutherans, the Protestants. Well, eventually it led to the famous 30 Years' War in 17th century, as the Central Europe was divided into two sides, Catholics and Protestant. The Catholic side, the sought support from Spain in the 30 Years' War, and Protestant side, the sought support from Denmark, Sweden, and Dutch Republic, and interestingly, Catholic France. Well, why did Catholic France supported Protestant? Well, this is what happened. The France was primarily Catholic, as I said, but their dynasty, the House of Bourbon, was a rival of the House of Habsburg in Holy Roman Empire. So, House of Bourbons there in France, House of the Habsburg in Germany, they were in big rivalry. So, that's why the France took the side of the Protestant to fight against Habsburgs. Remember, Habsburg was ruling in Spain as well. So that France was kind of sandwiched by Holy Roman Empire and Spain, you see. So if the Protestantism divide the Holy Roman Empire, it would be the benefit for the France. That's why even though it was Catholic, primary Catholic country, France supported the Protestant in the 30 Years' War. Well, 30 Years' War ended with a treaty called the Peace of Westphalia, in which Holy Roman Empire confirmed their political and religious autonomy of the state within empire. So the Protestantism became official. It means the Holy Roman Empire and its emperor still exist, just in names, until 1809 when Napoleon came. But in actuality, it was the end of United Holy Roman Empire and the beginning of a gradual dissolution into many independent states in Germany, because the many areas, the many part of the Germany became Protestant, came out from Catholics. And this was the birth of German Confederation. And from these states, the two particular states came in dominant power from this German Confederation. One is Prussia on the southeast coast of Baltic, and later formed the German Empire in 19th century under Minister-President Otto von Bismarck. And another one came in dominant power was Austria in South Central Europe. And when the two powerful states come about, they will become in conflict. The rivalry between Austria and Prussia developed into the Austro-Prussian War in 1866. And after being defeated at the war, Austria left the German Confederation and no longer took part in German politics. It became Habsburg, Austria Empire. Later became Austria-Hungarian Empire, took part in First World War. So this is the effect of the Reformation in Europe in later stage. So let's have a summary, the conclusion. The Protestant Reformation definitely shook the Christianity in Europe. The 1,000 years of Roman Catholic domination of the people's faith in Europe was beginning to change. It was the beginning of the restoration and resurrection of God's true church. The through handful of faithful remnants who heard and obeyed God's call on their lives triggered a change, like people like Martin Luther. And as it was still in the infant stage at that point, and many things needed to be sorted, so it wasn't a perfect, but nevertheless, it had begun. That was important. In next episode, we will look at other reformations happened in Europe since Luther. So be excited that God's plan of resurrecting church began. Well, until then, God bless. Goodbye.